Subject to Blackout. My name is Timo, and with me, as always, is Mike from the Name Taken podcast. Mike, how you doing tonight?
Doing okay, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing well. We decided last week to change it up. We just reviewed yet another Criterion Collection movie. But this time we decided to do something a little different by reviewing a TV series.
Yep.
The first two episodes of Isaac Asimov's Foundation released on Apple TV Plus.
Based on Isaac Asimov's Foundation.
Yeah, that is true. It is expanded and different from the novels, or so I'm told. But we decided to talk about that series because it was a series that I'm excited about, just by general love for prestige television, and this show looks expensive.
Yeah, it's got as pretentious of an intro as any. A Westworld caliber pretentious intro.
Oh yeah. And also, you are a big fan of the original Isaac Asimov works.
I like the books. Yeah, I like the books.
So we decided this might be a good time to venture into a little prestige television criticism.
Yeah.
So, Mike, why don't we start off there? What is your history with the books?
I mean, I'm sure I read the books as a teenager. So it's been a little while. I kind of thumbed through and revisited the first book just before we chatted. But the important thing to remember about Asimov's Foundation, it's a really early but also significant example of the genre space opera, which was kind of revived. This is from like the 50s. It was sort of revived in the late 70s with like much more expansive and flamboyant world building that you would find in like Star Wars. And it's also very well represented in something like Thor Ragnarok and a lot of the kind of space oriented Marvel stuff like Guardians of the Galaxy. It's all very space opera.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like where the books come from. And the books themselves are, very focused on this race to preserve knowledge in this galactic empire before it collapses. So the drama really is drawn from, on one hand, the politics of preserving knowledge within this particular group, and also the kind of realpolitik and international diplomacy of kind of keeping safe from like invaders and other forces to kind of like follow through on this particular thing. So really fun book series, really straightforward, not a lot of human drama, which was great. Loved that about the book series, not about the show. And we've only seen 2 episodes, but the show has certainly expanded on some of the content in the books. As I remember the books, at least, they were kind of, so the books were originally serialized, right? Like a Tale of Two Cities, like Dickens. So there wasn't actually a lot of overlap between the characters in these different sections. It would jump like 50 years, 100 years into these kind of like new pivotal events where you don't know whether or not it would, alter the trajectory of this, effort to prevent an extended dark age. You wouldn't know whether it would fail or not. And this series seems to want to spend more time with its characters than Asimov did.
Yeah, and that's where the rubber is going to hit the road between someone like you who's read these books and liked them immensely, and someone like me who knows about them but has never read them. So I don't know. I have some idea through basically research of where the television show is already diverging from Asimov.
Sure.
But I don't have the intimate knowledge of the actual works to maybe mind as much as someone like you.
So let me offer you then 2 things here. I can offer you something that I am trying here. I am trying. that I can kind of enjoy in theory that was not really part of the books, and something that I think can go fuck itself. So the thing that is interesting and could introduce dynamics that is not present in the books is the emphasis on the Imperium. So in the books, really, you're only focused on the Empire when Harry Seldon is like, "Yo, I've got psychohistory," and they were like, "All right, well,
we're gonna banish you.
Get the fuck out." And he was like, "Good, I wanted that. That's what I wanted."
Oh, I knew that was gonna happen.
Which they do in the show, so it follows that. Yeah. But that's the end of the Imperium. You're not really, there's no kind of like meanwhile, like. But there is in the show, and that could be interesting because it offers insight in a TV or a visual way that you wouldn't necessarily have in the book because it would be sort of confusing.
Yeah.
So that could be cool. So the overall premise of both the book and the novels is that there's this dude, Harry Seldon, discovers this math thing. Anyway, he can't predict.
He discovers math.
He discovers like a math thing. So he can't predict individual people doing like whether or not they're going to get Flamin' Hot Cheetos. He doesn't know any about that. Like,
they're getting Flamin' Hot Cheetos.
He doesn't know, but he knows that like if like 10 trillion people will get Flamin' Hot Cheetos. So he is able to predict these like large scale events that happen in these like massive timelines. And he realizes that this empire that's existed for like over 10,000 years is going to fall within 500 years. And there's two paths forward. Either they create this special encyclopedia preserving all of the empire's knowledge, and that will allow the galaxy to only spend 1,000 years in a dark age before kind of like returning. If they don't do anything, the entire galaxy will spend 30,000 years in a dark age.
Mike, and if just for listeners out there, is 30,000 more than 1,000?
It's 30 times more. And
hold on,
because
math.
because this show puts such an emphasis on maths.
Fucking English.
So, God damn it. So the thing is, like, Asimov was a mathematician, and but he was also an academic, and he was deeply invested in these like sort of questions of ontology, of like being, that were coming up for all sorts of scientists in the 1950s and 60s. People saw modernity crash into, and like not just modernity, but modern thought and science produce nuclear weapons. And so there was this sort of like crisis of significance in the 50s and 60s. Like, who are we? What are we doing? What are our goals? And one of the ways that Asimov was working through those ideas, those philosophies, was through fiction. And you see him doing those types of things both in the Foundation series and in all of his robot series. They're philosophical texts about the role science should play in politics. But they're also, kind of like mathematical texts. There are ways that he's kind of like flexing his own muscles in his own background. In the show, you have to sit through 10 minutes, 20 minutes of some asshole just cramming their background and their backstory down your throat. The fucking Imperium is about to collapse. I don't give a shit if you need to get an abortion or not. There's more important shit going on. Shut the fuck up about your baby. I don't give a fuck about your baby. Asimov didn't give a fuck about your baby.
But Asimov also wasn't making a television show where it's very hard to make a television show where you don't have characters to connect to.
So yeah, Foundation is not character driven.
It was considered unfilmable.
Yeah.
And it may be, depending on how the series goes.
It's filmable if you make it into a generic, overbloated science fiction drama. And that's when you sideline a lot of the cool diplomacy and realpolitik, and you elevate a bunch of people with obnoxious human problems just passing the idiot ball around. And
I think it's early to get that negative about this show.
And you have a lot of just CGI like George Lucas prequel trilogy establishing shots of like, ooh, here's a spaceship taking off, here's a spaceship landing.
Wow. All right.
Yeah. Also, one more thing. One more thing. Because I talked about that as math was such an important, it's a central thing for Foundation. That mathematics are how this dude figured out there's a dark age coming. But the way the show uses math or invokes math is reminiscent of the ways that movies directed at English speaking audiences invoke Spanish, where you don't have a character speaking Spanish and then there are English subtitles. Frequently it's like, well, adios, you guys, because I have to go see my abuela later. So like, so you'll have scenes where there isn't anybody talking about math in any elaborate sense, but like, what numbers do we preserve? 1, 2, 3, 4. Shall I go on? 6, 7. Like you'll have scenes like that, or like you were talking about prime numbers again. It's like, adios, guys. Hola. I have to see my amigos later. And I'm like, damn it. Someone just like crammed that shit in the writer's room. Like, ooh, we got to get some math in there.
Like
pie?
The prime numbers thing, like, fine, I'll give you that one. But I thought the general discussion of like, what counting do we preserve? It was more of, it was using general, math as you're referring to it,
Right.
as more talking about, what if we're, so as you kind of described, this is basically like a seed bank of knowledge,
Right.
that they're trying to create called the Foundation.
Called the Foundation.
And so, with a seed bank, you try to grab every seed you can, but maybe that's not possible. I mean, there's plants that we don't even know exist yet.
Right.
So what they're doing in this pan-galactic civilization, it is expands the entire galaxy. I don't know if it's the Milky Way, but it's the galaxy of the show and series at large. And there are mainline planets, and there's exterior planets, and there's places that are metropoli for this
all
universe.
sorts
And there's
of
also
planets and chocolate
and
planets and
but there's also backwaters where, much like, I mean, I was reminded during the scene that you're talking about where they're talking about like, what kind of counting do we keep in the histories? Because we could keep one counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or we could keep all of the countings that we can think of, which is actually much more. It's 27, it's base 12, it's base 8. There's all this other shit, and it kind of reminded me about like, there's these research projects trying to salvage as many indigenous languages that are increasingly being exterminated in the real world today. Right. There's groups that are trying to find like the last speakers of Aborigine, Australian dialects and Native American Indian languages that, there's only a handful of speakers left. So like, yeah, I get your point that, that is very like surface level, like math thing that kind of sounds cool, but isn't actually all that mathematically interesting. But I took that more as like a, hey, let's talk about cultures. What cultures are we saving? Are we saving the dominant culture, or are we saving a snapshot of who we all were? So yeah, I see your argument. I didn't mind the surface level math as much as you did.
My issue also with the message from that scene, I think, is my overall criticism of that it sort of like it didn't miss the meaning of the original series. It simply ignored it because it needed a different meaning that could offer the opportunity for additional melodrama. And like in the original series, one of the implications, obviously, of this guy being able to predict large scale events over a period of 30,000 years is it means what is free will, right? And
Yeah.
it's an overarching question that exists across the entire book series, which has not come up here. But in this discussion where it's like, oh, like we learned later that this meeting that we're both talking about was a budgetary meeting. Like, what is the budget for preserving a number system? What resources are we working with? And also, like, if we're working with somebody who is able to predict 30,000 years or 1,000 years, surely they have a sense of what number systems or what types of information are critical. So, like, the idea that a bunch of people are sitting around, like, quibbling in a budgetary meeting seems sort of like antithetical to the sort of grand purpose of everything. And that's where I think my main criticism of this series is that so many of these little things happen. They seem entirely disconnected from what I understand as a reader of the books to be the driving tension, the driving drama, the inevitable collapse of this empire and this desperate need to preserve information, while all the while having to manage all these different people and relationships using really shrewd diplomacy and realpolitik.
Fair enough.
So
On specifically that, I have a few larger picture things to kind of maybe sate you for a second, maybe let you enjoy a couple more episodes before you make a decision on whether or not this show is for you.
sure.
But
So you've watched ahead.
I've only watched the first 2 hours.
You watched the first two. Okay.
So the first 2 hours are according to David S. Goyer, who's the creator and showrunner. The first 2 hours are just the first 2 episodes of what he has planned as an 8-season thing. Like, he has 8 seasons.
Well, there's I think there's 7 books. I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
And this story, if told properly, should be thousands of years long. So I think it's very early to judge on what this show is saying. We didn't even know Ned Stark was going to die until episode 9 of season 1. And then it's like Game of Thrones changed as a show. It wasn't just like...
I read the book and I knew he was going to die the whole time. Also, you should have known he was Sean Bean.
I knew he was going to die because I watched the first season when the 7th season was coming out. So yeah. I knew. But that took that show and pivoted it. It said oh, you think it's going to be this because you've seen television shows and, obviously you've read books that go ba 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 ba, and the good guy exposes the truth and he's the winner. But he doesn't. He fucks up by not exposing the truth early enough, and he gets his fucking head lopped off, and you're like, that was the protagonist. What's happening?
Right.
So I think 2 episodes into this, it's too early, but also I mentioned David S. Goyer for a reason, because David S. Goyer has an interesting filmography.
Okay.
He is a co-writer, I believe, on the Nolan Batman series.
Mm-hmm.
I know he worked on the series. I believe he was the co-writer of those. Those are good movies. The first and second one, tremendous. The third one, a pretty good movie. David S. Goyer also worked on a bunch of the Snyder bad Superman movies.
Is that why everything is dreary in this?
That could be. It certainly, this is not the Snyder aesthetic. There's people, normal everyday human beings.
I saw some colors.
Care about.
I saw some colors
and colors. So I'm not concerned about the visuals, but I'm is David S. Goyer more the guy who wrote The Dark Knight, or is he more the guy who helped write Batman v Superman? Because those are two disparate things, and this series worries me because I don't know. I don't trust the writer of this series yet, or the leader of this series. So I see your point, because 2 episodes in, you have very strong points about these are problems that I see someone not understanding the original work.
Right.
But also, we are a fraction of a fraction into this show, according to the showrunner. So I'm thinking maybe that these small, petty human arguments might even be dismissed at some point this season, much like Ned Stark's head was dismissed
Shut up
from
about
his
your
body.
abortion, Gale.
Because it's like, hey, if this is really going to be over 1,000 years, Gale isn't going to be there. Brother Day, Brother Dawn, Brother Dusk are not going to be there.
Yeah.
Like all of these petty little squabbles, like even the interplanetary squabble, all that shit will be literally ancient history very soon if this show is going to expand the way that it promises to. So I'm looking forward to seeing if maybe they can confront some of your concerns by saying like, no, we wanted you to believe that, oh, we're going to talk about, having your babies and whatnot. And by the way, she wasn't trying to get an abortion. They were trying to talk to her about taking her womb and storing it so she could have the baby once they get to the planet. But no, there's a chance that this show takes that and says it's misdirection and pivots. But it's early yet, and your concerns are valid. But yeah, I too am a little worried about where this show would go. But I enjoyed the first 2 episodes, obviously much more than you did.
Well, so one thing, and we might have a departure here too, but I think when I originally introduced the books and I used the term space opera, that space opera is like evocative of also like a very particular aesthetic and like stylistic presentation. So I would never think of like Batman versus Superman or The Dark Knight, as awesome of a movie as that was, as being sort of a stylistic basis for the tradition that something like Foundation comes from. Like when I'm talking about, like, I'm using words like flamboyant, expansive, like almost like garish. We're thinking about like Flash Gordon, a lot of these like kind of older serials that were really over the top. And I was like, certainly not the particular style of humor that you would find in Thor Ragnarok, but certainly that kind of aesthetic is very much, I think, reflexive of the era that Foundation was written from. And I think having the show exist with that kind of aesthetic would have been more interesting for me, but also more unique in an era where a lot of science fiction and fantasy is just sort of like shades of gray. It's just like kind of grimdark. And like for me, it doesn't make any character seem any more. I think it's like a cheap way to imply seriousness by just making everything gray. And I don't think it might work for some people, but I just find it to be cheap.
I certainly don't think everything in this is gray. I think one of the things you can't knock this for is not being beautiful. Right. This looks amazing. It may not be the aesthetic that you wanted, but it looks real nice. But I think I could see a world where this is, and I'll just use this word to mean more than just like actual saturation, but like this world I could see being more saturated, much like Thor Ragnarok, where everything is more vibrant and the characters are more grandiose and everything is a little bit more exaggerated.
Yeah.
I could see a version of this show that is that, where the color palette is a little bit brighter, where the characters are a little bit less dull. There's a couple dull characters. That Raish guy is not very good in this, and I didn't care for him. But I think one of the highlights is the Imperium.
I agree.
I think so. Lee Pace plays Brother Day, who's like the main leader of this cloned emperor that just, they clone him at 3 different stages of his life every 25, 35 years or whatever. And Lee Pace is the one who's in the prime of his life. And Lee Pace is a tremendous actor who will choose scenery if given the opportunity, and he's beginning to get the opportunity to choose some scenery. It feels like there are some scenes where he feels like he is demanding attention in every scene that he's in. And he's also a little bit more colorful, like actually physically, with that nice like royal blue get up that he's got in most scenes. But I really enjoy what they're doing with that Imperium, just because it's so like, that's the realpolitik that you're kind of talking about. There's a lot of that going on in those scenes, as opposed to most of the Foundation crew scenes.
Yep.
And so I have hope that like any good television series that has interesting and realistic political scheming is a show that I'm a big fan of. And that's of course your Game of Thrones is, but also in the science fiction world, it's also The Expanse. Like that is a show that ostensibly is like, oh look, we're in space, but really what it's about is political machinations and terrorist organizations and conflicts in between different communities. And so I'm very hopeful that by expanding on the Imperium in the show and really leaning on Lee Pace and Terrence Mann's brother Dusk, like we can get some really high quality conflict and stuff like that out of that side of the show. While maybe the Foundation part kind of sputters at the beginning until it finds its feet.
Yeah, another thing, you're kind of like reminding me of this right now too, but did you ever watch the Expanse is a good example. Did you ever watch the sci-fi, the mid-2000s 4-season reboot of Battlestar Galactica?
I tried to watch that a couple years ago. I think I got through most of the first season. The pacing and aesthetic of that, I think, reminds me a lot of this. The way the kind of like futuristic cities are constructed, the way that people are like character development happens in sort of like a claustrophobic environment, like spaceship, like a lot of that. It feels like Battlestar Galactica. I mean, with no particular enemy, because there isn't one, but time is really the enemy for Foundation. But yeah, and maybe they retcon the Imperium into a bit of an antagonist as well in the television series, since it is going to be obviously a bigger thing than in the books. But I want to say that someone from that series actually has their hands in the pot as far as Foundation is going. So maybe again, there's a little bit of hope with Foundation going forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, before there was Game of Thrones, the writing team that really fucked up their final season was Battlestar Galactica.
Really?
Oh yeah, there were like angels. Like, why is someone a fucking angel? What is this? What?
Yeah, I didn't really enjoy Battlestar Galactica when I was watching it a couple years ago. Actually, probably 5-6 years ago at least. And I don't recall what wasn't working for me. It might have just been that I was kind of background watching it, not paying super close attention. But
sure. Used to be on Netflix, like a lot of things.
Now it's probably on Paramount
Plus. Yeah. That's right.
And other streaming services that I don't want to get. Speaking of, this is on Apple Plus TV. If you're interested, or you can do what Mike did, and this is no secret. He announced it on the last podcast.
I streamed
just pirated it.
Come for me. Streamed it from the Chinese internet.
Poor little Apple.
Suck it.
What are they gonna do without your money? $4.99 a month.
And I'm glad I did, because I thought it was dumb. I'll do it again.
I don't doubt it. You're a cruel, heartless, callous man, and you should be vilified as such. All right, Mike, let's take a little break here after talking about Foundation, and we will be right back with some other stuff. Next week on Subject to Blackout. Inspired by the release of the animated Disney Plus anthology series, Star Wars Visions, Mike and I decided now would be a great time to revisit the inspiration for both many of the episodes in that series, but also the original Star Wars movies. Of course, I'm talking about the celebrated films of Akira Kurosawa. The legendary Japanese filmmaker directed many influential films during his career, including The Hidden Fortress, which has been cited by many, including George Lucas, as an inspiration for the original Star Wars film. Kurosawa's cinematic prowess often made him the favorite filmmaker of filmmakers, from Ingmar Bergman and Stanley Kubrick to Werner Herzog and Federico Fellini. Kurosawa was a giant among giants. So Mike and I will be watching Hidden Fortress, which you can find on HBO Max and the Criterion Channel. Please watch along with us as we delve into both prestige film as well as the inspiration for pulp classics. All right, Mike. Well, that was our discussion about the first two episodes of Foundation. I will actually take the lead right now.
Sure.
With other stuff that we've been consuming. This has kind of been a pop cultural flare-up recently. Mm-hmm. Netflix gaining a little bit of attention again with South Korea's Squid Game.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of Squid Game?
I did. I saw it. Tell me more. Tell me about it.
So I decided after hearing about this show for like a week and a half now, the other day, that I was going to start it. And there were like rave reviews, and I was like, I don't know. The previews kind of make it look a little silly. And I posted this to Twitter earlier today. But basically my take on the series, and I finished it this afternoon, so this was pre the ending.
Yeah.
My take busy. On it. Listen, I get off work at 3. We didn't do this till 4 or till 7, so I had 4 hours to kill. But like the series is good to fine. Like it's watchable. And there's a lot of things that I liked, but there's a bunch of things that I don't really like, including the ending, it turns out, which I just thought, instead of having a character grow and change, was just stupid, but that's me.
Growth sucks.
Apparently. Instead, he just makes a stupid fucking decision just because they are clearly setting up a season 2. But I thought, aesthetically it was really cool, but it is a 9-hour every episode is a full ass hour.
Yep.
And it's 9 episodes long, and that is too much Squid Game. Those episodes needed to be 45 minutes.
Sure.
They do this thing, and this is a thing that I struggle with, and it's a thing that I've struggled with in a couple of movies that we've watched. It's you do a character development scene,
yep,
just to develop a character. And they do a thing, and you go, oh, this guy's a little lazy. And then they do that scene 3 more times, and you're like, I get it. He's the lazy one. They did that so many times with so many different things, not just like character development, but just like in a scene. Like there were some scenes that were really long and stretched out because they were building tension, and that's cool. But there were other scenes where there wasn't tension. They just took fucking 30 minutes because these shows are an hour long, and that's not a good reason to make a 30-minute long scene. God damn it.
That's how I feel about Foundation. Yeah.
It
sounds like you've read the book.
This is the type of thing. So Netflix has the ability, much like many podcast apps, to watch a television show in like 1.5 or 2.0 speed.
Right, and zip right there, yeah.
And if this weren't a South Korean show, I would have done that, but I listened to the dub for about 4 minutes on the first episode and was like, no. It looks like I'm reading this show because the dub was terrible. All of the characters sounded ridiculous. Yeah. They're all like, hey, I can't get into my ATM account. It's like, all right, guys, could we hire actors maybe to do this?
As somebody who dubbed things into English in an Asian country, No, you cannot hire actors. You do it for cheap and you pocket everything else.
That sounds correct, Mike.
Yep.
Mike, if you had popped up in this, I might have considered keeping the dub on. That's how bad it was.
I might be in it. Yeah, I don't know.
So I couldn't really watch it in fast forward because I had to read the show. But I mean, there were literally times where like a character would say a thing to a character. And if you just press arrow over on your laptop, that's a 10-second skip in Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, there are scene after scene where one character will say something to another character, and you can hit that arrow over twice and still catch the response. That's 20 seconds of dead air. I was like, I hate this show. Like, why is it taking so long? There's a lot of cool and interesting things. Unfortunately, this series very much felt like it was setting up like season 2 when it didn't need to do that. It could still have a season 2 without being like, let's make this character disappear and maybe he's dead, but you didn't see a body, so and then the end was just, from a character development standpoint, was just infuriating to me. But I mean, if you have 9 hours to kill,
I'm okay.
By all means.
I'm glad he saved me the time. Yeah, I'm glad he saved me the time.
I would watch the first episode and then make the decision on your own. It is not something you need to binge. I ended up binging it just so I could kind of talk about it this week.
Sure.
And see if it lived up to the hype. It, for me, is the thing that I will not return to. The main actor and main character, I don't really like his acting, and I really thought the character was made out to be a coward in a way that was irredeemable.
Okay.
And despite the fact that they try to make a face turn at the end, I thought he was so unbelievably cowardly so often, and indecisive and unlikable, and a bad guy.
I'm trying to think about
bad guy. And I really didn't care for the character development of that character at all. And then they completely, any character development given to him, they just fuck over in the last 30 seconds of the film or show.
I'm trying to think. There are definitely shows in movies where I think some of the characters have been executed so poorly that I'm rooting for nobody to succeed by the end. I want everybody to be punished.
I was rooting for two people to succeed.
Okay.
Both of them ended up they were both ladies. One of them basically gets brought into the show to get brought out of the show.
Okay.
About 3/4 of the way through. And so that was disappointing because I liked the character. It felt like a very different character. It was a much more irreverent, like laid back character in this very stressful situation. And I thought that was like a breath of fresh air. There was all of this tension and just no one to break that. And she wasn't funny necessarily, but she was kind of like aloof and above all that petty melodrama. So I liked that character. And then the other female character that I really liked, I thought they might have larger designs for her, but they turned her into a plot development character toward the end, which I thought was a little lazy and disappointing.
Sure.
And then, a lot of it toward the end. The show is very much something you haven't seen before. It's very a little cockeyed. But by the end, it just kind of felt like it was hitting a bunch of just like, well, now this has to happen, and now this has to happen. And it was doing some interesting stuff early on, but it didn't hold up for me. And yeah, if there's a season 2, I will be passing. Is there anything that you've been watching or listening to or playing this week?
I saw and I sent it to you, and you didn't care, which is fair enough. But
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know you don't. The intro to Cowboy Bebop. The
I'm
live
glad you
action
brought that
version.
up.
Yeah, I'm
I
glad I
did
brought it up.
care. I started watching Cowboy Bebop.
Did you?
The original series, yeah.
Yes. The great thing about the thing that made me feel hardened about the
Netflix
Netflix version isn't like a commitment to the source material for sure, but a commitment to the music as being a character on the show, as being as important to what's going on screen. And not only did they get the original like jazz composer to do all the music for Netflix, which is like fills me with hope. I think it's going to be great. But they reconstructed the original introduction, which is kind of like a mixed media, both live action and comic, based on the original intro. So you were watching Cowboy Bebop. What did you think? It's very anime.
Yes. So I don't usually dig on anime, but again, it's kind of like the problem I have with a lot of Star Wars cartoons is I don't want to watch a cartoon that is clearly for children.
Right.
Like no matter if it's a really good children's cartoon, if it like the moral of the story is that we should be friends, like don't fucking want to watch it. And so I bump into that with a lot of cartoons that adults like that are for children. This, however, felt not as gritty and grimy as a Frank Miller, like Sin City thing.
Yeah.
But the first episode just kind of ending with this woman who the entire time you think is like pregnant, realizing that like she had like chosen
filled with
wrong,
drugs. Yeah.
And actually like she just gets like shot up in her spaceship and then she drifts into space and you just see all of the drugs leaking out of her womb and you're like, oh, she wasn't like this, damsel in distress. She was a co-partner in this crime. And it's a beautiful shot of her just kind of drifting in space with these vials leaking out. I like that. Like the whole episode, I was like, this is all right. It's okay. Like it looks really cool. And I mean, again, before you sent it to me, I had seen the opening to Cowboy Bebop just because that music and that those visuals are stunning. But it was cool to see that the live action is going to do that as well. But when I saw that last scene of her just like floating in space, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can get behind this. Like this is an adult show with this is a mature show, not an adult show. This is a mature show with mature themes, and it's saying things that aren't like, hey, you should stick with your friends. It's like it has, ambiguity to it, and it has the ideas of choice and like early on, like I wasn't getting that, but like that last shot made me go like, maybe I should watch this like whole thing.
Yeah, it's got great noir elements and great exploitation elements and fantastic world building. It's the type of like outlaw sci-fi show that Firefly desperately wanted to be but wasn't nearly as cool as. That is, I think, in some ways captured by The Mandalorian simply because they're drawing on the same kind of classic Japanese traditions.
Yeah.
That Cowboy Bebop is also kind of like entrenched in.
A shogun bounty hunter.
Yeah. But even more than that, I mean, I think you're right. The characters are compelling. They don't need positive resolution. Things can be bad. So it makes the characters more interesting. It makes the drama better. But yeah, I love Cowboy Bebop. Totally. And I think the casting is great. I think John Cho is going to be really good.
Yeah. He looks tremendous. He looks great. In all the early stuff.
Yeah.
And I also liked that like one of the recurring things was like the chef or whatever. I've only watched like an episode and a half because I wanted to do this Squid Game thing before this episode came out. But like the other guy on the spaceship was like cooking peppers and beef.
Yeah.
And the running joke is like, there's no beef in the peppers and beef.
Right.
And one of the like kind of like you're talking about, like things don't necessarily get better, they just might not get worse.
Right.
Was like at the end of the episode, he's like, what are you cooking? He's like, peppers and beef, and the character doesn't even ask if there's beef in it.
Right.
He just knows. He's like, there's no fucking beef in it, and it's just implied. It's not like, I bet there's no beef in it. Like, they're not talking down to the audience. They're just saying like, he asked before, he's not asking now. It's not because he's not curious. It's because he knows what the fucking answer is. And you know what the answer is. And like, yeah, seeing something adult like that, seeing something where it's not patting you on the head and being like, did you follow along? Did you get it? Which Squid Game does a lot of like, hey, do you remember when? We'll show you a flashback in case you forgot the show that you're fucking watching. Like, remember 38 minutes ago? Do you? It's like, yeah, I'm watching you. Like, if people can't keep up with your plot points, then fuck them. Don't, whatever. This is getting back to my frustration of Squid Game more than it is my enjoyment of the first episode of Cowboy Bebop.
All right, well, yeah.
No,
I'll keep watching Foundation. You keep watching Cowboy Bebop then. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely want to. Again, because of Squid Game, I had not had the time.
That's fair.
Looking forward to continuing that. Well, do you have anything else, Mike, that you'd like to talk about?
That's it for me.
All right, well, then that's going to be it for me as well. For those of you listening along, you can head on over to subjecttoblackout.com, where you can reach out to us and you can find all of our links to our socials, including Instagram, Patreon, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. Also, feel free to rate, review, and subscribe. And lastly, you can find Mike on Instagram and Twitter at Namesake Podcast. And I just want to mention that next week, you guys should probably be looking out for a second soccer special with my friends and I who talked about soccer last time. We're developments have happened in the Premier League, so look forward to that. And Mike, as always, I want to thank you for joining me.
Cheers, Tim.